Thank you everyone for coming tonight. I'm just going to do a thumb up every now and then when I want the slide to move on. But just as by way of introduction, I'm from the Department of Environmental Management at Lincoln University in the Faculty of Environment, Society and Design. And I'm going to be talking tonight about some of the work that we've been working on, that I was working on as part of the National Science Challenge on Resilience to Nature's Challenges, which is the worst name anyone has ever given a project. And I want to say from the outset that this is a long, drawn-out project that has struggled because I actually get 1 day a month to work on this, and that 1 day a month is taken up with going to meetings to help an overall project going. So I might get 1 day every 6 months if I'm lucky at the moment. So I'm struggling to complete this piece of work the way that I want to see it completed. So what I'll actually be talking about tonight is a prototype rather than the finished thing that we really would like to get to at some stage. Okay, so thank you. Just thought I'd ask you, what do you think of when you think of planning? And I should preface this by saying I am a member of the New Zealand Planning Institute. I am a professional planner. I like to think of planning as applied geography. But what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of planning? Hold that thought.
Being able to see into the future, probably.
Is it the famous Resource Management Act? I like being able to see into the future, but for a lot of people, you talk about planning and immediately people go, RMA, let's get rid of it, the end is nigh. And it's not just Judith who said this before the elections, but several other people. And I just want to say here, if anyone wants to have a good debate with me at some stage, I will defend the Resource Management Act to the hilt. So if anyone wants to have an argument, we can have that over biscuits and so on. But it does have bearing on this talk overall. So I will raise it a little bit more later on. The second thing I want you to think on is, what do you think of when you think of planners? So, is this another highway? The model made me do it. Someone who's sort of sitting a bit isolated from reality. I would say that I quite often feel that way when I'm thinking about certain organisations I deal with, who I will not mention as I'm on camera. But thank you. What about rural planners? Now, rural planners are a rare breed because there's no rural planning program in New Zealand, which I think is kind of odd, given we have most of the country as rural planning. So the closest we get to that is what we call environmental planners, where I put in the whole of rural planning and treat, and bring it in there. So that's part of the driver that comes here. I teach the Resource Management Act, I teach the law papers in the Resource Management Act, I teach the theory of environmental planning and policy. For my sins, I have worked in central government at one stage. I helped write part of the Resource Management Act, so maybe I'm a little bit biased. I helped write the bit that led to the creation of the Maori Party, coastal tendering. And so I'd like to think I'm the father of the Maori Party, although I don't think they would necessarily agree. And when I think of rural planners, I tend to think of real people. People actually get down away from the models and have to deal with the real world. And so I'm going to talk about these two fellas later on. I'm not sure if there are any sheep breeders here, but we're very disappointed that the Leaston show got cancelled this year. And is the Amberley show on?
Yes, it is.
Drat, didn't know about that. It's too late to enter, I think, because we were looking to enter some of our sheep this year. You'll all recognise Ryeland. Yeah.
One of my relatives established the first one in Scotland.
We need to chat later. I might get some stuff off you for our webpage. Thank you. Now, planners have traditionally focused on a world of came from in a lot of respects from urban England, a lot of our planning. We did have American planning come in as well, but it was based on a sense of stability, stayed, tradition. I kind of like this scene. This is, I like that. I can't get away from it. I'm afraid Di will hate me for saying this, but I actually like the willow is my favourite tree. And I'm a big fan of the poplar as well. And I love seeing sheep grazing on grass by rivers. I think they look superb there. I do teach in the Department of Environmental Management. How I feel is not necessarily the way that anyone else feels who comes through my programs, but you do have to balance these. Thank you. And what we've had is we've moved from that sort of steady planning for a stable world, a stable reality. We have suddenly moved to a new age, an age of rather unwieldy gods who are capricious and sort of jumping in here and doing things like old Bucky in Christchurch and shaking up our reality and making us think about where we're going a lot. And if we go back to tangata whenua, they have their own stories of gods and so on. I realise I'm in the way of some people. Where should I be standing here? Is that better? Yeah. So we have these we have these traditions where you're talking about European gods and the mighty Thor, and I'm a big fan of Thor. I named one of my lambs Thor when I was a kid. Or you're thinking in terms of tangata whenua values. These gods are capricious. They do things that are just, not predictable. Okay. And the events here basically led to a fundamental rerouting of our thinking as planners about what we should be doing and how we should be doing planning. And that's really the sort of the background I want to come to this sort of talk with. It's, for me, the earthquakes in Christchurch, the earthquakes in Hurunui, we had just started our research project in the National Science Challenge. We had done a selection process which said that the area we should select to do our research on was the Kaikoura area. And just after we made that decision, and we were supposed to be planning for resilience to prepare people for disasters, the damn quake came from, you Hurunui guys shook the ground and shook up the place, and suddenly we were not in a situation where we were doing research for resilience. We're in a situation where the quake had happened, and we were trying to figure out, okay, how do we build a resilience program around here? Because as funding goes, we were not allowed to look at response and recovery. Our funding was for resilience. There are other people funded to do response and recovery. So it was a little bit tricky because we didn't want to sort of come blundering in and asking people a whole lot of questions when they're actually trying to survive and trying to live it. You don't want a whole lot of researchers bumbling around your countryside when you're actually trying to survive. So it threw our research program out by a year at least, which central government didn't really appreciate. As usual, they want all the deadlines met on time, and it gave us some problems. But this was the National Science Challenge, so we had funding, and with our program sort of shaken up, literally, but also with the problems of time constraints and trying to figure out where we would fit in, we started to think, okay, what can we do? And people sort of took different projects from what they originally set out to do. And there was a major shift in the way of thinking about the same time with the National Science Challenge. Traditionally, the way people approached planning for hazards and disasters in New Zealand was very much technical, thinking in terms of scientific models, looking at predicting and so on, and you do that and you get it all sorted out and you're all prepared for the disaster. Well, the Christchurch earthquake taught us a thing or two about being able to predict the future, and it made us rethink what we should be doing in terms of planning for disasters, planning for major disastrous events. And that really gave rise to the Resilience Challenge. And I thought I had to have this photo of this book on here. I've never actually met Doug Avery, but I have read his book. And to a lot of it's shifted that in a disaster, you're actually often on your own trying to cope with all sorts of stuff, or with a very small community that you're working together to try and deal with things. And so planning on the mega scale the way we had been, that's fine for civil defence, it's fine, I don't know if anyone's seen the AF8 model of predicting the alpine fault and where the shakes are going to work out. That's great if you're working at sort of national planning level in that sort of area. It's not terrifically helpful if you're down at the farm level, because AF8 does not come down to that level of resolution, so it won't actually tell you what's going to happen on your farm. And virtually no model will, because we all live in sort of little places that are parts of the real world, not part of some modelled world. And so the idea was, how do we actually, the thoughts of was going through my head, how do we actually help farmers be more and more resilient? And as luck would have it, I had been having some issues. I have the remnants of my father's family farm. My father's George Rennie, who's known to one of our people here tonight. So, and we've got the last 70 acres, which is, I always have trouble with this, 28 hectares of the farm is what we own now. That is in the Selwyn catchment, which, as you probably are aware, was one of the ones that really got into farm environment plans, water management, and so everyone in our catchment who's got more than 20 hectares, well actually in my area, more than 10 hectares of land, has to do a farm environment plan, which is actually a water management plan or a nutrient management plan to show how we would not lose more than 15 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year from our part. Up catchments is 80 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year, which I think is a little bit unfair given that we were there first. But 15 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year is for us. So I was going through this process with my wife, who I should say my wife was going through this process because she's actually the person who does most of this stuff. She's far more capable than I am. Doing these farm environment plans, and I was thinking, these farm environment plans aren't really helping us a lot. In fact, they're a pain in the butt, and they're actually reducing my resilience, and they're reducing the resilience of a lot of people I knew because of the amount of stress that they were going through. I know a number of farmers in the Selwyn catchment who have not even started applying for the resource consents to farm yet. I know one who has just got their consent, a neighbour of ours who's got their consent after about 7 years, and it's been a long, torturous battle for him. And thank God there's a Rural Support Trust. I think they are really unsung heroes around this place. But it is stressful doing those sort of plans, and those plans are sort of forced on you. And sort of coming today, it almost came before the elections, but I think the horses got a little bit scared, but the National Biodiversity Strategy, that's the proposed biodiversity strategy, when it comes into force, if it comes into force after the elections now, will require people to develop biodiversity management plans on their farms. And that'll be forced from central government, requiring councils to require their plans to build that in. Selwyn District Council has already got that in there. They've just released their proposed district plan. They have provisions in there to provide incentives for people if they do a biodiversity plan, and they're looking at backing that up with funding ecologists to help do that with through their long-term plans at the moment. So there's a sort of a linked thing there. But those biodiversity management plans are something that I think will probably be coming in the not too distant future. After 2021, I think, if the Resource Management Act still remains, we will be getting into greenhouse gas management plans. Now, for a long time, the Resource Management Act has not been able to deal with the things that contribute to climate change. So it's had provisions in it that requires people to think about adapting to climate change. So you have to think about sea level rise and all those sort of things. That's built into the Resource Management Act and into the plans that come from that. But that's adapting. Mitigation has not been in there. We've relied on these market mechanisms, which so far have been a total disaster. They haven't worked. And personally, I don't think they ever will work really well. Over the years and years, I've come to the conclusion that plans with hard rules in them are what actually change people's behaviour on the land. and I've seen it happen in Selwyn. We've had to change some of the things we do. A regional councillor that I know quite well, John Sunkel, also his farm has really probably gone up in value tremendously because it looks really attractive now. He's taken out land and put in trees and so on and planted out, but it's all to meet ultimately to reduce the nutrients flowing into the streams. He may have done that voluntarily. I suspect that the real driver though is having rules and a plan that actually say if you don't do it, you're going to be fined. So in a sense, the government has given up waiting for people to do things voluntarily and has said, we are going to insist that you do it. And to be fair, I was working in central government when they first created the Resource Management Act, and we were saying, and councils were saying to us, don't tell us what to do, we will deal with it. And then when the reviews were happening in the 2000s, it was the other way around, especially when they were putting together the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement. The council saying, oh, you didn't tell us what to do, so we didn't do anything. Okay, you can't have it both ways. You're either going to do it, or you're going to say, let us, we're not going to do it, you tell us what to do. So they've gone from, we'll do it, don't bother telling us, to tell us what to do, and don't let us muck around, we'll just do it when you tell us. And so government has taken that on board, and there was a national government at the time, and I think it's fascinating that national government were the ones who really put out national policy statements with teeth, freshwater, coastal, and urban development and so on. They really pushed these sort of policies through. Urban development one, I think, it ended up with Labour, but it was coming. So it's this recognition that they have to actually push things to get it to happen. Now, I was looking at all this and thinking, these things are actually stressing us out. They are making it harder for farmers. It is making them less able to cope with things. And we've had these major disasters, and we work up here in Hurunui, and by this stage we were talking to farmers and hearing about how they were trying to cope with things. And it occurred to me that seeing as farmers were having to do farm environment plans anyway, why not try and find something that was actually useful for them as opposed to focusing on the environment? Why not try and find something that would actually help the farmers as well, but something that would not be imposed on them, but would be something that they could take on voluntarily and be an added value sort of thing for the farm advisors. Because farm advisors are getting it in the neck, coming out telling farmers, you have to do this, have to do that. It'd be nice if they could actually say, hey, we've got something, we actually are here to help you, and actually mean it. So we started to think about that and how to make farmers and farming more resilient. I have to say, our National Science Challenge was restricted to dealing with natural disasters. We couldn't look at economic disasters, and we couldn't look at plague or pestilence or COVID, which we didn't know about. We couldn't look at M. bovis or any of those sorts of things either. We were restricted to things like earthquakes, floods, drought as an exacerbator, so climate change as an exacerbator, as something that would make things worse over time, but it would be realised through the actual floods and droughts that we would see as a result of climate change. So it was sort of droughts are sort of a slow impact major natural event causing problems that we could deal with. Thank you. So drew up this rough model. Basically, the effect of farming activities on the environment were being addressed through the farm environment plans. And what we really need was the effect of significant natural hazards events on farming activities, and needed to actually fill that area somewhere. And I thought, well, if we're doing this farm environment plans anyway, let's just have a module on the end called, or attached to it, called Resilient Farm Plan, which is entirely voluntary and just there if people want to. And a number of people were thinking along similar lines at the time. MPI had Nick Craddock-Henry. I thought I'd put his photo up here because I know he was out here a wee while back, and he was our team leader in the bit of the science challenge I was working on, him and Tom Wilson. And Nick had a contract from the Ministry for Primary Industries that was looked and produced a report on indicators of rural resilience and what sort of things you could measure. But that's okay, it tells you what to measure, but it doesn't actually give you help as to what to do about it so much. And Federated Farmers, it turned out, we found out fortuitously, were working on or looking at a tool, and this is, they've got the same sort of problem I have. One person pretty much who had to respond to every emergency that came up. So I was going to have a meeting with her and all set up, and it was Tasman fires. And next thing there was a flood somewhere, and she was involved in sort of the response to it. So we are still working through on that relationship. I think there's a survey or a questionnaire going out to Federated Farmers members asking them how much they want to get involved in the resilience side, planning for resilience, and I'm hoping that the members will say, yes, we think this is useful, because then we can work together with Federated Farmers a bit more. They have produced a kit or a guiding toolkit for Federated Farmers to respond to major rural events, hazard events, which I think has gone out this year somewhere around the branches. And I have to say that Federated Farmers, from what I've seen of them, have done a heap of good in terms of dealing with the politics and some of those angles of being able to open barriers for people to get through back to their farms when civil defence people and so on were keeping them out. It was the Federated Farmers people who came in there, so I've got quite a lot of time for some of the stuff that Federated Farmers has been doing and where they've been going on these sort of issues. So I quite like to work with them on these a little bit further. But we did work together early on when we could, and we exchanged ideas and we sat down, brainstormed some things, and we pulled together knowledge that they had gathered and knowledge that we had gathered. And somehow my slides have gone astray, and I'm not quite sure what's happened to my hard work today of getting these sorted right, but just don't know why that's happening. You may have seen a couple of these slides before, or a couple of these photos before. There's even a mini golf course in Kaikoura that's got that a wee model of the cows on the sliding thing. I recommend that golf course, mini golf course, far better than the real golf courses. But one of the things we're having to realise is that what we did was we started to realise that we were listening to a lot of people talking about what they had found useful during the earthquake. So then we started to ask them, what do you wish you had known before the earthquake? What would you like other people to know now that you wished you had thought of and you wish you had done that would have helped you get through this earthquake thing? And there's really, some of them were such almost obvious when you think about flexible fittings on water structures and so on, so that the rigid fittings all split and cracked, and so you lost your water. So saying, look, have flexible fittings, those sort of things. We need those sort of things, really practical, down-to-earth stuff. And I thought, this is the stuff that you really need to know to make people more resilient. You don't need whole of climate models. You actually need to be prepared for whatever comes your way, because it's all pretty unpredictable these days, and you need to have down-to-earth sort of stuff. So this is what we've tried to build into the toolkit that we started to develop, and we got information from people. We found a number of people we considered key. We didn't want to, as I said, as close to the earthquakes, we didn't want to go around and make ourselves a nuisance of everyone, so we picked key people and we attended meetings and we took notes and just listened to what people were saying and gathered it together. So as a robust scientific methodology, it would probably fail on a number of grounds. As a pragmatic, practical tool post a major event, I think it works reasonably well. The other sorts of things like location of key infrastructure, where have you actually got your water tank on your farm? Is it sitting on top of a cliff that's going to collapse in an earthquake? Those sort of things, just thinking through the things they said, I wish we'd thought about where our infrastructure was. The number of people who did not know where their water pipes were on their farm, where it actually came from. I'm one of those people. Like, I grew up on our farm. I think I know where the water pipes are through the paddocks. My wife thinks they're in different places. If we have a disaster, I don't know which one of us is going to be proved right, but we're going to have fun trying to find those water pipes, because I've been in there since, well, they predate my earliest memories. I know they were out there when I went around. I can remember the border dike system being put in. So it must have been just around there, because they would have had to put the pipelines in for the water troughs after the border dikes. But where they are exactly on the farm, I'm not sure. And if you don't know that, you are quite vulnerable in any sort of situation, trying to figure out how to get water to your stock where it might have broken. People talk about their social relationships, whether or not they had. I think everyone now knows if you're on a dairy farm, you need to have a generator that can kick in when you lose your power. Amazing how many people did not have that when you think about it in hindsight. But this is all part of what we're thinking about, is these are things that people realise in hindsight that they wish they had thought of beforehand. So we went around and gathered all that sort of stuff up, access to emergency decision makers, those sort of things, and started to gather the data together. And we then started to think about the drought came along, and on our place we went through 3 years of drought, and I looked at the maps last year and they're showing drought in Hawke's Bay, and if you look, there's a wee triangle of drought around the around Selwyn, right, going down to Lake Ellesmere, and that's us. I could drive up the road to Lincoln, to the university, and I'd pass into the rain halfway to work, and then I'd drive back in the afternoon and I'd pass out of it again. We were in that little triangle that was the same as Hawke's Bay, and our sheep got quite skinny. These aren't our sheep, these are just images I grabbed off the internet. But if you go to the Ryeland Sheep Breeders Society Facebook page, you will see a couple of our Ryeland sheep in the drought, and they look splendid. And that's something I'm going to mention in a couple of moments. Yes, please. Oh, I'm going to do it now. So there has been a push in New Zealand over the years to come up with sort of the super sheep, the one that's going to be perfect for all sorts of models and all sorts of things. And it's also gone a couple of different ways as well. I think I feel like I'm preaching to converters to any farmers here, but people have either gone meat sheep or wool sheep. And if they've gone wool sheep, they've gone merino because nothing else counts anymore. I mean, who on earth thought merino wool should be used for carpets? I mean, really? But that's where they're going now. And to me, merino wool is not a carpet wool. And meat. So our Ryelands have become a rare breed because they are dual purpose. They are wool and they're meat. Ideally, they illustrate the best things of a diversity. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Well, at the moment, I'm glad all the eggs are not in the wool basket. But we've gone down this model. It's what we've done with a whole lot of other things with our farming. We take the latest thing and we go monoculture on that, and we lose that diversity that actually makes us more resilient over time. And I remember hearing in Hurunui that a bit of the feedback I was getting from people here when we were going around was diversity is what's getting us through. We've got a glam camping tourist thing that's helping to get us through. We've got we've got a little bit of tourist operation here, we've got something else here, we've got something else here. We had all sorts of different things on their farms, a few trees, honey, other sorts of stuff, and the combination was getting through as opposed to people who are in one line of produce only. And I happened to look at the FAO recently, and New Zealand is on their vulnerable lists in terms of its sheep breeds, because it's identified that we have followed a commodity line of sheep, and we're probably not going to have the range of breeds we might need for climate change. And our Ryelands, just in case anyone wants to buy some, are known to be very thrifty. It's one of their strengths, and our Ryelands have done quite well during the droughts, although this last one this summer, this early autumn and so on, has been really did push them. So this whole thing about looking at diversity of breeds, doing something different from just going for the market thing all the time, trying to find some sort of balance there, is one of the areas that is coming out as something to look at, diverse forms of production. Wind. We started looking back into previous stuff and getting more information. One of my colleagues had done a lot of research on how to, in a contract with FMG actually, how to orientate or what to do with your pivot irrigators when you've got a major windstorm coming, and checking through what people thought should be done and what people were doing, and they have guidelines for it, which I'm not sure if anyone knows about them. They've got this nice set of guidelines for pivot irrigators and what you should do in major windstorms and what really doesn't work, but which people still think possibly does and do, and not to just put them all under the trees to protect them from the wind, because what then happens is the trees get blown over and fall on top of them. So some of the ideas, just weren't actually working the way people expected them to do. And then with fire as well, we started to look drought. Drought leads to more fire, and we started to think about what's happened there. And one of my colleagues at Lincoln University, Tim Curran, is doing a lot of work on green fire breaks. He's from Australia. They have a few fires in Australia, and he's sort of familiar with the idea. And looking at how you make your area more resilient to fires. And he's been working on flammability of trees. So if you're going to plant your shelter belt, have a thought about how flammable the trees are that you're planting them in, so that you can actually pick trees that are likely to be less flammable, and therefore not be such a problem in fires. Not like we have at home, got this nice little aki right by our deck at home, and I realised listening to him and looking at his list that that's the worst possible thing we could have planted there to keep us safe. Looks beautiful, but not terrifically sensible. So he's been doing a lot of work on that, and he's working with us on at Mount Grand now. He's got a program worked out to try and look at different grasses, to look at flammability of grasses and how to reduce grass fires through that sort of thing. But you get these other sort of things cropping up, like we could put water dams in to have dams to protect, to give us access to water during a fire. But when we had the Port Hills fires, all those people that most farmers love to hate, the lifestylers, they were the ones with the swimming pools, where they got the water from, totally destroyed the swimming pools, by the way, but where they got the water from to actually then put on the fire. The helicopters coming in, scooping out of the swimming pools. The water trucks coming up, emptying into the swimming pools, and the helicopters coming in again. If they hadn't had the lifestylers with their swimming pools, they would have been in much more of a problem with that Port Hills fire. So it started to make them sort of think about, okay, what are we really thinking about in terms of these areas? So I'm sure every farm would like a swimming pool as their fire protection thing and get it off tax that way. And then just building locations, thinking about escape routes on different weather. And we're thinking that what would be really good would be to have an app that could tell you when you're out on the farm, especially if you're on a big farm, or if you've got a wood lot or something like that, you've got people working on wood, have an app that'll just tell you when the wind is coming from this direction, a fire has broken out, your best evacuation route is that way, not the normal way. And just things like that that could be useful. We haven't got anywhere near getting an app like that yet, but we've certainly been discussed the idea with Scion, and we did have Scion people involved with our research project. But it's again, who's going to fund these sort of things? Yes, please. Snowstorms. Something that I'm not sure how much I can say about this on film, but there can be issues where you have farms that are managed from a distance, and farm managers have certain things they are allowed to do and certain things they're not allowed to do, and you have farm workers who come from, say, Fiji or somewhere like that, who have no idea what snow really is, and then you get a snowstorm. And the farm managers may not have the authority to be able to stop doing or tell the Fijians what to do, or to put the money in or resources or whatever to help look after them. That awareness, that lack of understanding that we have when we're bringing a whole lot of people from, which we've solved with COVID, of course, temporarily, but that lack of understanding that people have of our conditions coming here makes them much less resilient, much more vulnerable when you have a disaster. So as a farm owner, as a landowner, what are you doing in terms of thinking about those sort of issues in preparation? Just so that it may never happen. But if it does happen, as we found with earthquakes and fires and other things, we can't predict them. That's why they're a nuisance, or worse. So we have to. So the idea is to start to think about these things ahead of time. And then the tsunami. I was quite surprised to discover that our farm was actually in a tsunami zone. We're on. Yeah, we're on that map in the shaded area. I got an email just telling me that there's a potential tsunami, and these were the evacuation areas. So we evacuated, even though I didn't think there was any chance in the world of a tsunami coming from Kaikoura around Banks Peninsula and up over Lake Ellesmere and up to our place. Thought it would be good practice just to do it. But it was interesting to even think about that. We had not realised we were in a tsunami area. We had not thought about it. And I suspect that a lot of people don't realise necessarily what risks they are exposed to. And Selwyn has something called Selwyn Gets Through or Selwyn Gets Ready or something like that. I'm not sure if Hurunui does as well, but I got onto the telephone list of that because I was doing this research. I never knew it existed before that. Doing the research, I thought, well, doing this research, I probably should be on this network, that gets these messages automatically when there's a fire or flood or something like that. And something came through one time. There's a burglar in the area. Police are on the lookout for such and such a coloured car. If you see this in your area, notify the police straight away. Now, I knew I was the only person in my network who was on that, so I hopped on the internet, and we have a little LinkedIn group, I think it is, called the Goats of Selwyn, because a couple of goats showed up that no one knew who they were one time. We'd try and find out who they were, so we set up a group to try and find it out. That's just our neighbourhood. We LinkedIn network, and I put a note on that saying, hey, if anyone sees this car, and someone said, hey, we did see that. And then they said, how did you know about that? So that's how we end up introducing the concept of Selwyn Gets Through to local neighbours through our LinkedIn network, and then getting that connect up because of potential burglar. Not because of disaster, but it will be useful in disasters. So it's finding ways to get people to connect up and actually realising these things are there. Whoops. I wonder what happened there. We'll go for another, see what happens. Okay, for some reason my headings have got all over the place. So the key thing with this, with our Resilient Farm Plan module, is it's to be a module that's tacked on. It's added value. People don't have to do it, but it had a whole lot of things we started to identify that should go in that. We looked at a number of things with Federated Farmers, mechanisms, things like people saying, well, I can't afford to buy a generator. Okay, Federated Farmers saying, well, we could get a bunch of people together working with FMG and say they could get a group discount. It's FMG, Farmland sells, I get FMG and Farmlands confused all the time, even though they're completely different. But Farmlands would be able to offer discount rates to people if they do a bulk buy sort of thing. So there's opportunities of that if you have several people working on these sort of things together. So what we ended up doing was, okay, so what does the farm environment, resilience module look like? And I think if you take one and pass it on, it should be enough there. We said this has got to be something simple. And over in the UK, they had experts come in and tell the farmers what their risks were. And we thought, actually, farmers are coping with risks all the time. They understand their place. They understand the area pretty well. It's just they don't always necessarily think of some of the questions they probably should be asking themselves. So basically, we came up with, from all the stuff we've been asking, we came up with, or listening to, we came up with a set of questions that could be almost self-assessment questions for farmers to ask themselves about in preparing for things. So these are some of these sort of questions, like energy. Do you have a portable generator? You know, how vulnerable are you to energy disruption? What do you actually have in place if there's an energy disruption? Communications. Do you have things like handheld radios? What are you going to do if you're short of a caught short in a disaster and you've got someone stuck on that side of the farm, they can't get back to home base? You know, do they have a handheld radio on their motorbike or whatever they're using, their quad? And this was what a number of farmers had done after the earthquake. They had invested in these things to give themselves stuff so that they could communicate in disasters. A lot of farmers don't realise how often they have visitors on their property. Now this might be someone who's just a contractor who's doing some fencing work, or it might be a truck delivering something, or you might have some visitors there from the town, or you might have some tourists, you might have a wee tourist operation. When they're on your property, they're going to be looking for you to help them out in a disaster. Have you actually thought about how to deal with that? You know, have you got ideas in place? Now some of the OSH things help in this way. We've got a lot of things for sort of human safety issues, but really starting to sort of notify people, as one farmer was saying, is having to tell some of the local council people coming onto his property, don't go down there because there's a whole lot of grassed over cracks and it'll be dangerous. Of course, the council people thought that he was trying to hide something, so that's exactly where they went. So there's a little bit of a Darwin factor that comes in here as well. But just having some ideas, pet evacuation has been a major problem, especially in fires or floods, that even hard-bitted farmers have animals that are their pets, and they find it very hard to leave them. It's easier to leave their kids sometimes than to leave the pets, because if they leave the pets and they take the kids are going to get on to them about the pet. And I have to say that Ryeland rams do not like walking through water. It is a major hassle, and what they did to the sheepdog that we tried to use to help get them through water left the sheepdog up on the back of the truck feeling very sorry for himself. So just thinking through some of these issues about pet evacuations, insurance. What sort of insurance do you have in place? Do you have it for your whole farm blanket insurance or for individual things? And that's a question that you really need to think through on your individual properties. Also skills, first aid. How many people have a first aid certificate that's current and so on the property? Do they have a defibrillator just in case they need it, for themselves or others? Those sort of things. Do you know how to use a radio? You've got a radio, but you don't know how to use it. It's not going to be very helpful. Or how to use online stuff. Then vulnerability assessment is something that most farmers have a pretty good idea of where the major cracks and landslides and rock falls and flooding is like to occur on their farm. But have they necessarily thought about it in terms of the placement of the access roads and some of their hard infrastructure? And quite clearly, that has been something that a lot of farmers have been re-evaluating after the earthquakes about where they had put things and where they should have put them. Habits, I love this one. This is one that really leapt out at me. How many of you know how full your petrol tank is right now? Yeah, I know because I just filled it up. But, what a lot of people do by habit, and I'm one of these people, is I wait until my tank is on empty before I fill it up. And one of the habits to be more resilient is try and develop a habit of filling up at half full. Treat your half full as if it's empty. And make sure that you are in that position, that you always have at least half of a tank of petrol in your car. Because in a disaster, you may not be able to get any petrol, and then your mobility is suddenly gone. So some of these things are habit stuff. Generator maintenance. Great to have a generator. How often do you maintain it? Are you keeping it up to date? And things like that. Another one that came through really strongly, and again, I'm guilty of not doing this. And I did it recently, and it paid off for me quite well. Take photos of any damage that occurs. Take photos of your assets. After I did this project, I went out and took a photo of my kayak, and just thought, just in case something happens to it. Well, during COVID lockdown, last week of level 4, some prat came up the river and took our kayak from our property and disappeared with it. I haven't seen it since. And of course, what did I have to do? I had to provide a photographic evidence of my kayak. And I had it, because I'd been thinking about this from the research, and I'd gone around and photographed everything that was of any significant value on the property, including my kayak. And I was able to, had no problems getting through the insurance and so on. The police were quite happy as well. Still haven't got the kayak back, but I do have the insurance payout. But if you haven't taken photos of things when damage has occurred, then after a disaster, you'll have the insurance assessor coming saying, oh no, that wasn't caused by a disaster, that's something that happened before that, so we're not going to pay out on that. So date stamping, photos, anytime you see some damage that's occurred, a wind or a gutter has fallen down, you take a photo. But these are things that people tend to discover after the event rather than before. Simple things like maintaining your physical fitness, having a supportive friend. The mental side is really important, and this is one of the things that Doug Avery's book is really good for, talking about that side of things. Having someone you can talk to. It might not be your family. You might not feel that you can share with your partner what's really going on in your head, what's really stressing you out, because you don't want to stress them out. Or you don't want them to feel it's their fault because they just spent a fortune on the vet or something. And having regular planned time out to keep stress levels low, so actually getting away and just taking time out and doing that. Now, it's really hard to do that on a farm. There's always something more to do. But if you actually think about it, when it comes to disaster, you want to be able to cope. And so having done the sort of thing, having made sure that you do give yourself time out, is actually part of your farm management operations. It's as important as putting that new fence line in. Social practice as well. Do you know your neighbours? Everyone says that, oh yeah, we know our neighbours, usually, especially in the countryside. Well, actually, you have to really ask, really, do you know your neighbours, or do you know the neighbours that you see frequently, or that are in the same line of business as you, farming or something like that? But do you really know the person who's actually flatting in that house just down the road that used to be some farm workers' cottage but is now being rented out by someone? Those sort of things. I made contact with a new neighbour just recently, just because I thought, again, I'm not practising while I'm preaching, so contact them, getting the exchange of cell phone numbers and so on, so that we could do things. Social gatherings, really important. And I'm not a Christian, but I really admire the Anglican Church in our area, because every year, twice a year, they run community meals and get-togethers, and we all get together as a local community. I say we all get together. There's certain people who are never there and who are not actually tied into the community. No one knows who they are. And so, we're not really getting all the community together, even when we think we are. We're getting certain segments of the community together. And it was really interesting, Kaikoura. People saying, oh, we know everyone. So, we told everyone, and everyone knew about this and next, and we had someone at a meeting where it's saying, well, actually, I don't know any of you. I've been living here for 7 years. No one ever told me anything. I had, and I know a number of other people know the same thing. And it turned out there's certain parts of Kaikoura who are not as well off as others and are not in that main part of the community. I'm betting the same will be in parts of Hurunui. I don't know Hurunui as well as I got to know Kaikoura. Social networks, Facebook and so on. I've got friends who've gone on Facebook purely because it gives them a network that they can contact. And I think there was a guy in Hurunui who went on Facebook and said, look, I've had my something big on his dairy farm that got off balance, his vats or something, and didn't know how to get them back on. He put something on Facebook and got up the next morning. There 3 guys had shown up, didn't know any of them. They'd seen it on Facebook, they wanted to help, and they had the tools and equipment to do it, and they just arrived and did it. And there was just, knowing he had something on Facebook, and he just put something out on Facebook, and it worked. So those sort of things work. I've got Facebook without because the university told me we need it for marketing. Actually, when we had our snowstorms closing the university at one stage, that was how I communicated to my students whether or not they had lectures. And because the university system wasn't coping, the answer phones weren't keeping up, it was Facebook that did it. Okay, so the idea with these resilient farm plans is you have a bunch of questions like these. We've also got some guidance for advisors so that people come around and just ask you to, you can do them by yourselves, or they can sit with you and go through it and say, okay, what have you been thinking about this? What sort of things do you see as your major issues, your major vulnerabilities, the things that you really think you couldn't cope with on your farm? And then turning that into a sort of a multi-year program of actions in each of those categories: physical things, natural environment things. It might be what trees you're planting, those sort of things. Physical would be where your road is and your fittings. Financial aspects, your insurance policies, and a bit more diversity in your income sources. Your personnel, your staff management issues, those evacuation training, the first aid certificates, those sort of things. And don't do this all at once, because you can't. It's just not practical. But if you build into a farm plan, so that's part of what you do when you're doing your next, looking at your budget for your expenditure for next year, say, okay, we're going to upgrade that. That would be a good time to put in some flexible fittings, you know. And you know, I'm going to do that pipeline. I need to find out where that actually is. Doing those sort of things, you know, so it's built into a long-term, multi-year plan. We want to see how this works, and I'll show that to you in a moment. But basically, we thought that when people are reviewing their farm environment plans, which they have to do for the audit purposes and so on, it would be a good time to just review also their resilience plan. Say, have we actually done some things we've thought we'd do? Okay. So one of my students, Hugh Lofnan, from Hurunui, in 2019 took this tool and went and tried out pilot on 3 farms in the Cheviot area. 2 were sheep and beef and 1 was a dairy farm. And basically went through it with them. I don't know who he did it with you. He may have done it with someone who's here in this audience, I don't know, because it was anonymous. And basically he went through the exercise with them and then said, you know, does this, at the end of this, do you think this has helped improve your resilience? Is it sufficiently context specific for you? Does it integrate with the FEP? Does that appeal to you? And the answer were from somewhat to yes. And the one that I was really pleased about was they felt it worked really well with FEP. They said this could really work well. And if we actually have it written down and it's something we're going to review at the same time as the FEP, then that really will mean that we will be keeping an eye on it. It won't just go into a bottom drawer or something like that. So that worked really well. One of the major somewhats was not sufficiently context specific, and some of it was a bit redundant because they'd already done some of that stuff, partly as a result of going through the earthquakes. They were already on top of some of it. And they said this would be really good for someone who hasn't been through it to do. We've learnt this already. So the future for what we're doing is, this is now being tested further with Becker, the major consultancy company, because Hugh Lofton now works for them, and they've got a farm advisory section, and he's taken the idea up with them. And we're applying it to 2 of the Lincoln University farms so that we can monitor it over a long term and just monitor the accounts, monitor the expenditure and see what it actually does and whether it improves the resilience to disasters. And of course, one of the problems is, with, like all researchers, put all this research into making people resilient to the disaster. You want a disaster to happen so that you can see if it worked. But on the other hand, you don't want it to happen. So might never know. I might be, you know, hopefully I will die before we ever find out if it made them more resilient or not, but at least we'll have a good track record of what they spent trying to make themselves resilient. We're hoping to work, as I said before, Federated Farmers is doing this survey of their members. We're hoping to work more with them to develop it further. There's some really cool ideas that we discussed and we just don't have the money or the time. Little things from having something, a fridge magnet that people will have ready access to having some apps that will help link through very quickly, and actually being able to do this sort of thing as an online assessment. Now, Federated Farmers are looking primarily at emergency management, so having something that's got you geared, that has a set of things to do when you're in an emergency, what you do then. And where that dovetails with us is we're saying we want you to not necessarily get into an emergency as much because you've done all the stuff earlier to be resilient. So that's where the 2 are dovetailing together and we're feeding back to each other quite well. Unfortunately, Louise is on maternity leave at the moment, but I am in contact with Julie now to look at how we can do something on that. We're happy to put the ideas out to consultancy groups. We did work with some farm advisor consultants early on who gave us advice on how we should formulate this sort of thing so it would work and work integrated with a farm environment plan process. We'd like to go back to them first because they helped us out and give them a more finished product that they can then, I'm sure, they will take it, adapt it. The ones who are really into the electronic things will produce a whiz-bang thing that people who are really into electronics will love. The people who are working more with farmers who are more pen and paper stuff and more tangible realities, they will go their way. So I think there'll be different people, different places, and they'll have their own little angles on how to improve it as they go, which they probably won't share with us because they'll be the intellectual property that gives them their marketing advantage. But we're a university, we do research for the public, so my approach is to be as open as I can with everything that we do on this. And you've all got those things there if you want to have a look at them sometime. I've got my contact details on them. Feel free to give feedback on them, give suggestions. I've only included the drought one there. We've got different ones for snow and different things that we're working on. We haven't really got the snow one yet because our research didn't involve anyone who had been dealing with snow. That was picked up from other people as we were going. We hope to pick up the snow from work at Mount Grand and places down in the Wanaka area. But yeah, drought and fire, I think we've been getting onto that pretty well, and earthquake we've definitely got onto pretty well. But if you've got any thoughts or comments, we'd appreciate them. You might even see something there that's not actually doable, not allowed, like allowing stock to have access to waterways during an emergency or after an emergency. There's some things there as a planner I'm quite curious about working through in a legislative sense and how that all works, because there are provisions for emergency actions to be taken given retrospective consent. And I wonder if that might be able to be applied to stock, but then everyone says, oh, a drought, you can see it coming, therefore it's not an emergency. But an earthquake, I think, might be able to find some ways around some of those things. Anyway, that's it. Thank you very much for listening. And
Are there any questions that anyone, or any comments that anyone would like to make to Hamish on things? I recently got a questionnaire from Federated Farmers actually, which covered a lot of these things in terms of the security of your house, in terms of fire and where everything was, and if you knew a lot of the points that you've raised.
yeah,
So,
they would have been from what we're working on last year, and we've just been not able to work together as much as I would like because of our time constraints.
I was surprised, listen, I wonder if you're surprised that when resource consents are needed for forestry, that there's no consideration generally for fire proneness and resilience.
Yeah,
And isn't it surprising in this situation?
it is surprising. District plans are starting to change. I think Selwyn is the first district plan I've seen that's actually got clauses in it about fires. And it'll be interesting to see how that carries through elsewhere. But it does surprise me. But a lot of them are assessing against their plans. If their plan doesn't say anything, then they don't look at it. We didn't actually work with any forestry sites per se, only just as a...
Well, planner who just addresses forestry consents, like for Banks Peninsula, says no, there's no consideration
Yeah.
for fire. They consider whether you shade your neighbours, but not whether you burn them.
Not would be, yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Seems phenomenal.
yeah,
Maybe it's called privately by insurance. Liability.
yeah.
Liability, that's a big threat.
Yeah, that's, but to me that's always too late. Yeah.
could the Lake Ohau experience be something that people could learn from? Because that's an example of what you're talking about, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
Hamish, I've fought more fires in this district than I ever want to know about again in the early days, mostly because of railway trains. But some were not, and it's a very drought-prone area, Waipara, where I've been all my life. 2 fires almost took out the Waipara township. They would have done had it been in nor'west the day they started. I saw one start in Picton with a lightning strike. I went past High Tap 2 days before the fire and looked at the roadside and said there's a bunch of idiots living around here because there's grass that high up to the river. And somehow something's very, very wrong with the local government system we've got at the moment, and it all comes back, I'm sorry, to the Resource Management Act, because up till the mid-80s it was not like that, and I can prove it on paper with records that the districts were a hell of a lot better off then than they've been since, because everything's become carry a piece of paper around an office instead of the people on the ground getting out and doing the job.
Yep. I totally agree that getting people out on the ground is a key problem. I think it's also, though, they're having to carry a lot more jobs than they used to have to do, and they're also having the local government restructuring, I don't think has necessarily helped them, and the costs for them keep on going up, and the rates, they're very reluctant to rate people. So that's where you've really got to turn around and say, work with the community more and say, okay, how do we keep these down? How about grazing some sheep on the side of the road or something like that, and doing it, you know, doing that sort of thing, but they're very reluctant to do that.
Jenny won't let you graze the tussocks at our house.
Yep, and I get really worried when I look at my neighbour's property, and they did their farm environment plan, and they accepted the argument over where the riverbed was, and as a result, they don't allow any stock into there. So now we've got this huge dry grass area upstream from us, along with fallen down willow trees and so on. You come to our place, and because we have sheep, we don't have cattle, so we're okay. Sheep aren't livestock, which I love. The sheep keep it grazed down, and it's not a fire hazard, and we do get dry. And I look next door and I think, and I look there and I keep on looking around the country thinking, I understand the riparian strips, I understand that's a solution for nutrients, but you have to look at the whole package, which includes the other risks that you're exacerbating by that. And you have to look at that. And I look at some of these motorways going into cities, and I think if they haven't planted those with the right plants, they have created nice fire paths if a fire gets underway, you know.
You made the point that you're in love with willow trees, and to me they're a noxious weed, because they've blocked all of the watershed of the Waipa and the Weka Creek and the Omi Creek, down to the stage where it's drying up on my property 2 kilometres above where it always used to dry up. And that's entirely due to the fact that it's being destocked.
Yep, that would be part of it. Also, I used to work in the Ministry of Works and Development when I first got out of university, and Chris van Crooyenord and the people up at Kautari spent a fortune going around the world finding the best willow trees to bring together to create breeds that would be totally resistant to all the threats around here, because we needed the willow trees to stop the erosion in rivers and stuff like that. Same with poplars. They spent a fortune doing that. They had this huge expertise in it, and they did really well. We've got to congratulate them on the success. There's a problem with that sort of success, and I think that there are, like round Lake Ellesmere, there's far too many willows in places. You can have too much of a good thing.
I've got a whole lot of policy and theoretical things to say. And one was like, you've got to inspect things, and there's different ways of doing that. This is monitoring. You can appraise at the beginning, you can monitor all the time, and then you can evaluate at the end or something like that. So I suppose what your road slides or your councils, or I don't know what they're doing, but they must have identified which one they're doing and how they're doing it. I think.
Well, no.
That's the first thing.
Yeah. Sorry, keep going.
There's
Yeah.
a whole lot of other things.
Yeah.
There's your resilience. You've also got vulnerability. Resilience comes from the natural sciences. Vulnerability comes from the social sciences, and you've got some differences of theories between them. But there's been quite a lot of work gone on and arriving at some kind of workable viewpoints that will meet both groups. I think you'd be aware of that.
Yeah.
And what else did I think of? I might have forgotten. That might be to save everybody. Oh yes, about this whole topic of a strategy. You've got strengths and weaknesses. You've got opportunities, risks, and opportunities and threats, haven't you?
Yes.
So I wanted to talk about farm management. So you've got management. That's management tools. So I'm coming from a farm management background now, and you've got so that's strategic planning, and you've got, I should have taken some notes, sorry, and you've got, what else was I? Oh yes, when you study farm management, or at least when I did it, which was quite a few years ago now, you had this area of risk and uncertainty, so some of these things are covered there, but you're much more specific. You're a bit more like the budget manual or something that's like the home environment plan, and yeah, would be good to have a chapter there on identifying these specific checklists. It's good too, but I think you must, what you've presented to us, you've chosen this talk to present to us very specific and concrete things, but there must be a whole lot, because you're a university professor, there must be a whole lot behind it. But I know you don't come from farm management. Do you interact with farm management?
Yeah, actually on Mount Grant, Alison Bailey, the Professor of Farm Management, is working with us on this as well. Yeah,
on
so
that
yeah,
challenge.
yeah. She's working with, not on the challenge. She wasn't in the challenge. That was a central government, and how you got into that was really arcane sort of way that they went about doing that. But on Mount Grandin, the Centre of Excellence down there, we are pooling together, and that's one of the good things about, for the first time in quite a while, we're having right across faculty involvement there. So I'm working alongside Alison and the people in farm management there. We're working with the pastoralists, we're working with the like Tim Curran isn't in our faculty, he's a grass person and so on. So we're working with all those people, and we're looking at those structures. And yes, a lot of the questions they ask around this does do the more strategic level. What I'm really keen about is having something that is a practical, concrete thing for people to be able to actually do, and that ties in with the planning tools that they're already having to deal with. So that's what I'm trying to link in.
The other thing is that you're a geographer, and the first time I heard the term natural hazard, I thought it was just ridiculous, because I thought hazard was flashing light or something, and really it's a natural process. That's what Dene would say.
Yep.
Natural processes like erosion or whatever it is, or landslides.
Yep.
The landscape. It's
yeah.
the fact that we plant ourselves on a floodplain, for example.
Yep. We're definitely on a floodplain. We've had, just realised the photo that didn't show up there was actually our place being flooded. And after 3 years of drought, we had a flood that completely overtopped the riverbanks, and there was no dry ground on our place whatsoever for quite a while. And it is a case of where we actually go to do things, but we can't actually. There's nowhere that's absolutely safe.
Sorry, that was just
yeah.
a random response.
Yeah, but it is. It's good. But yeah, and link it. And this is what I'm trying to do, is link this in with farm management systems that people have, and make it all work together, and actually think about the resilience aspects.
About 4 weeks ago on a Thursday night, there was a violent southwest storm came through, and the next day I came back from Kaikoura. There was not a way of contacting anybody from Kaikoura to Greta Valley, because all the power lines had smashed down everything. Yep. The Wi-Fi was totally out. You couldn't buy anything because the petrol pumps had stopped working. You couldn't pay for anything with a card because the Wi-Fi was down. If you didn't have cash, you were out of luck. Yep. And I came from Nelson a couple of weekends ago. As soon as I dropped out of Golden Downs Forest and right to Waikari, there was no phone network that would work. Now, this modern system is full of big holes when a real emergency arrives. Yep. And what's the planning to overcome that, for God's sake?
There's sorry?
Yeah. I just think we're all conservative, aren't we, in this very risky, dry environment with fluctuating seasons and whatnot. That's why farmers are conservative, but that's why I like to hang on to the old technology, because I'm afraid the new technology might break them down.
Hell yeah.
It's like cars that you can fix, or cars that you can
and it's
keep it simple.
one of the things that did come up, and I can't remember what, we've got something in our sheet which I didn't put up there, and I'm not sure if it's on those sheets there, and I'm not terribly communications minded, but there was something that came up that was really useful up in one of the valleys up the Clarence, that they had one place that had some sort of satellite radio connection, and so they found ways of communicating with them, and then even as walking or whatever, and then communicating from that. But I still remember the days when they took away all of our telephones, and we kept our own hand wound one, which we had our own line that we connect up between our place and our other place, which was across the river. So it's, but the party line had gone as well, and we just kept the old hand-rolled one with a bell so we could communicate across there. And that still works fine, except we don't own those two properties anymore.